Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping the final day of action at the World Junior Championship happening in Ottawa, Ontario. So we'll hop into it today, starting with, of course, the scores from today's game. We start with the bronze medal game, which, was one of those games that was kind of strange again, where, the Czechs jump out to an early lead, then Sweden dominates play the rest of that period, and then the second rolls around, and it's a toss-up game from there. It's 2-2. The game just keeps being more even, and eventually the Czechs start playing the same level that the Swedes do, and then you get to overtime, and it's a 10-minute overtime, 3-on-3, and it's one of the unfortunate parts, I will add, about the Iihf and the way that they schedule games, because, it was a 3:30 game, and the next game started at 7:30, and so what ended up happening was this game goes to a shootout, 14 rounds, I might add. By the time the game's done, it's like 6:57 by the time they're off the ice. And then you're panicking because it's like, okay, well, we got to get on the ice for the US and Finland, and no one's there. And so because there's a team on the ice that just sung their anthem, who just got medals, and there's wasn't great planning today. But nonetheless, right? A great game by the Czechs. You could see them slowly but surely building confidence throughout this game. And it's kind of been the story of this tournament for the Swedes, where, the big games that matter, the Swedes just haven't shown up. And, they played a good game against the Finns yesterday. A couple errors led to the pucks in the back of the net. Same thing today, where a lot of the Czech goals were errant passes up the middle of the ice. The Chalet goal, you got to be real careful doing that, because you put the puck on the stick of the best player and, right, it's going to end up in the back of your net. So for the Czechs, 3-2 victory today. I'm going to show a clip of the game winner and the resulting celebration from the Czechs. So I'll show you that now, and we'll talk about the rest after. So that was the goal from the 14th round of the bronze medal game of the shootout. And it was, in my eyes, one of the greatest things we've seen at this tournament. And as much as I am a vehement disagreeer of the shootout in the playoffs, this was one of those games where it was, this is a well-earned victory for whichever team takes this one. And both goalies, Gildolf and Rabel, both played amazing throughout this shoot. I think they let in 3 goals for the Swedish goalie and 2 for the Czech. And, it was just one of those games where it really could have went either way throughout the entire game, throughout the overtime period where it was real back and forth, and then into the shootout where it went 14 rounds where they couldn't decide a winner. And the one thing I will also mention is I was really hoping that they'd pull out Peter Sikora from the Czechs to shoot, because he shot the first one in that 5th round. Obviously, to a warm ovation from the crowd, we'll call it that. But I was hoping they'd bring him out to be the ultimate villain, and I thought his attempt was decent, and I thought it was good enough to shoot again. But they went with their star players, and it worked out for them. So with that in mind, 3-2 is your final here in a shootout. Czechs will pick up the bronze medal, and in a well-earned bronze medal for the Czechs. And this was a team not really expected to do that much. They were a good team coming in. They were in that big 5 that we were talking about. But the way the groups looked, it looked as if they'd have to play Finland in that first round, in that quarterfinal round. And, I don't know if the Czechs would have beat Finland. And obviously they beat Canada, so you could make the argument that Canada beat Finland, so therefore Czechs should beat Finland. But at the same time, it's one of those games, a real back and forth. So, the Czechs ultimately win the bronze medal in the shootout. We can talk about the shootout, but that will be probably an hour rant, and who knows, I might make another video about the shootout and the Iihf in a little bit, especially for medal games. But nonetheless here, 3-2 was your final in a shootout. And then we move to the gold medal game. And the one thing I will also mention, kind of talked about it a little bit off the top, but this game started, I think it was 50 minutes maybe after the Czech anthem was sung and they're on the ice. So everything kind of got a little bit pushed back before the 7:30 start. So, this Finland-US game was delayed and the fans were allowed to stay in. And that we really saw that, right? Where a lot more bodies in the rink. Yes, it's the gold medal game. Yes, everyone wants to see it. But it was a pretty packed house for that game. So it was good to see, especially because Canada isn't in it. That's sort of the type of thing we see where once the home team's eliminated, a lot of people don't show up. Ottawa showed up for this final game. So 4-3 is your final in overtime. And this was a game, early on, that first period, dominated. And I mean dominated by the Finns. And it kind of looked like the U.S. was about to get routed. 2-1 after the first. Kind of a giveaway goal was the one goal that the U.S. scored to tie the game. And then from there, the Finns just kind of took control of it. And they kind of hemmed the U.S. in for that entire first period. Second period rolls around, the Finns get a quick one, that's 3-1. And then kind of makes you remember something. And that was the preliminary game where, the Finns got out to an early lead, a 3-2 lead. And they tried to hold it in the third, but the U.S. offense was just too much. And we saw it, right? The U.S. back half of that second period, bang, bang, 2 goals. And all of a sudden, it was a tie hockey game going into the third. And what I'll say is it was an excellent game where we saw the U.S. kind of resurge. And the third period was kind of everyone for themselves and really could have gone either way at that point where, Finland had a couple good chances. The U.S. had a lot of good chances. We sort of saw them take control in that third period and into overtime. But the ultimate decider was what you're going to see here with the Teddy Stiga goal that put the U.S. over the top, winning the gold medal for the second year in a row. So that was the goal that put the U.S. into the gold medal position, and it was very interesting because that entire overtime just completely dominated by the U.S., right? And Petteri Rimponen, hands down, was the one thing that really stood in the way of the U.S. winning that game earlier. In yesterday's video, I was very critical of Rimponen in net and the glove save and the glove in general, where he seemed to be having ejecto mitt every time the puck hit his glove. But then, early in this game, we saw sort of the same thing on that first U.S. goal where it hit his glove, bounced over, and then it was in the back of the net. And I was like, okay, here we go again with that sort of weaker glove. But then from there, he kind of turned a switch, and everything that hit his glove was a catch. Was he trusting it fully? I don't know. But he was good enough to at the very least allow the Finns to stay in this game. The second goal wasn't his fault. Third goal wasn't his fault either, where you let guys walk into the middle of the ice and they're going to score, the second goal off your own defender. So a tough one to save there. So, for Finland in this game, Rimponen was not a problem in the slightest. And as much as the first goal hurt a little bit, the Finns outplayed the U.S. throughout the entire first period, and it looked like they were going to outplay them through the entire game, especially at the start of the second. But then, once again, the U.S. picked it up, found their groove, and when the U.S. gets rolling, they're a very tough team to stop. And I think that the end shots were something like 40-28 for the U.S. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I'm going to assume it was probably 14-6 or 14-7 after the first for Finland. So a lot of the opportunities for Finland came in that first period because the U.S. wasn't able to hem the Finns in their own end. And we sort of saw that especially evident in that second and third period where, the Finns really struggled to get their 3-wing flank going, and especially having that second winger for support. We saw that center kind of have to come back down and play defense. And as soon as that happens, plays along the boards get that much harder for the Finn offense. And eventually, of course, that leads to the puck staying in the end and the defensive end, and of course, high quality shots for the U.S. So this game, could have gone either way. We saw the game-winning goal, and for the U.S., first time in U.S. history where they went back-to-back, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of sort of what that means for the country. But, we think back to last year. very solid team coming into the tournament. Not necessarily favorites in my eyes. Sweden was the favorite coming into that one. But, the U.S., very solid team. This year, they were my favorites from the start. We look at a team that has 10 returning players from last year, and from a gold medal winning team at that. And we saw it, right? And we saw that veteran leadership, especially from guys like Ryan Leonard. And the one thing I do want to mention is I do give a lot of flack to referees, especially in big games, for, calling a lot of penalties. And in my eyes, that Finland-US game was perfect, right? Where they buried the whistles. Unless you were trying to commit manslaughter, you weren't going to get a penalty. And it was very well officiated where they're not going to give out opportunities, right? And that is kind of what I've been talking about this entire tournament, is especially in these big games, you don't want it to become a ref fest where, they're trying to call every little penalty, kind of ease off a little bit, let the players play, don't let the refs get in the way. But this was a perfectly officiated game. So, as much as I knock on the officiating, especially at this tournament, you got to give credit where credit's due, and tonight was an excellent example of what a good reffing for a gold medal game should look like. So hats off to the refs for this one. And I don't say that very often, but tonight was a really well performance from the referees. So hats off to you guys. And now let's talk about the news, right? Where we have the curse of Sweden. And I don't know. I don't know where to begin with Sweden. And I know a lot of people in the comments on the last one were talking about this is just Sweden we've come to expect, especially playing Finland. And, I have to agree. And it's interesting, right? Because first goal goes in for the Czechs, right? And the Czechs dominate the first couple minutes of play in the first. And then all of a sudden the Czechs score a goal. And from there it was like bang. And Sweden was like the best team we've seen in that first period. And then they kind of lose their groove. It's kind of like that why factor. We talked about it last year. And I think it was for Canada. I'm pretty sure it was for Canada. And it's about the why, right? Is why are you playing this? Are you playing for your country? Or are you playing for the individual? And today was weird because I didn't really see Sweden playing for either. And they had moments where they looked really good individually and they looked really good as a team. But then there were some moments where they just looked discombobulated. And it was one of those games where, yes, it was a close game through and through, but we sort of saw the Czechs and their why factor. They wanted to bring home a medal for their country. And yes, the game went to a shootout, but the Czechs really picked their game up. I think they even evened out the shots at the very end. So for the Czechs, very good performance here. And they definitely earned their win. So move on to the next piece here with, of course, the 14 rounds we saw today. I believe that's a double IHF record as well. And 14 rounds is a lot of rounds. You think about the shooters. I think they sent out Chalet, I can't even count how many times, right? Because you have your best shooters, you stick to them, but eventually they run out of moves. And, if you're a goaltender, you really don't know what you're getting because they run out of moves. So 14 rounds for the Czechs is their news of today because, they played really well. And, they earned their win every step of the way. They showed their why. And that's their key, right? They wanted to win a medal at this tournament from the very start. That's what led them through Canada. That's what kept them fairly close against the U.S., right? And, one or two bounces the other way in that U.S.-Czech game, and who knows, maybe it's Czechia in that gold medal. So, for Czechia, 14 rounds is kind of the story of their tournament, right? Where they weren't really expected to win. They lost a very long time, and then they sort of hang around, and then they beat you, right? Same with Canada, where Canada fell asleep in that first period, and that was the difference, right? Where, same thing with Sweden today, where the Czechs came out to a hot start. They had their why with them. Canada didn't in that quarterfinal. Sweden didn't in the bronze medal game. So, the 14 rounds in my eyes is kind of the story of this Czech tournament where they're not necessarily sort of that favorite coming in on paper, but they're going to beat you because of their why. So for me, that's where the 14 rounds comes from. Then we move on to Deja Vu. And I could start singing. You probably already heard me cough earlier. I can't really sing right now, but this is where I'd start singing the Olivia Rodrigo hit Deja Vu because, it's a tough game for Finland where they beat the US in many aspects, right? Preliminary, they did the exact same thing where they beat the US in many aspects. First period, they hemmed the US in their zone, and then it became defense. And it's very hard to play defensive hockey against the US because they just keep coming. And if you don't attack back, that's where you run into trouble. So, for this Finland team, they played an exceptional tournament, right? Not really expected to do much in this tournament. Obviously, in my eyes, I had them as the 4th place team, but they still got the silver medal this year, and they played really, really well. So for Finland, it's not a wasted tournament, right? They performed well above expected, and for Finnish fans, I know there's a lot of you that watch this because we've got to a point now where Canada is now the 5th most viewed geography for the channel. Lots to be proud of at this tournament for Finland. And, you think back to their first win against Slovakia where, wasn't their best game. And you think back to the very first couple games, right, against teams like Canada where they lost 4-0. Teams like Germany where I think it was 3-1 final for a win, where Germany kind of held with them the entire game. And then you come out, you beat the US, you gain a little bit of momentum. You beat Latvia, you come into the quarters, you play an okay game against the Slovaks, you get what you need to get done. Then you come out against the Swedes and you play really well against the Swedes. And then you come into this gold medal game, take the US, who in my eyes were the best team at this tournament on paper. And, lots to be proud of there, right? And they nearly won it. They had a couple of good chances and just couldn't bury it. And that was kind of the end result there where goaltending kind of held them in it for the Finns, and so did the Americans, right? Where if they have a different goalie in net, especially in that first couple minutes of the first period, who knows what the final score is here, where Finland really could have got out to an early big lead, just kind of taking the US out of it. So, 4-3 is your final here. US wins gold, and now let's talk about the back-to-back. First time in US history that they win back-to-back gold medals at the World Junior Championship. And obviously a big accomplishment. And you think about a historic team in the US, right? And they're one of those teams that you just assume they've done it before. And I think that for me was one that was very surprising, was the fact that they never actually gone back-to-back. So you think about the teams that they've had in the past, they had teams that could have gone back-to-back and they just haven't. So, big deal for them. They'll look to three-peat next year on home ice. Don't count them out. They're a good team again. I mean, the Canadian team should be better. Looking at some of the names that are still available, I don't know, right? Because very well we could have the exact same problem, right, that we've run into all tournament long, where you try and nitpick your roster and you get beat because of it. So we'll see which Canadian team's out next year. The US obviously contenders, and we'll get to the group preview. It's gonna be a bad one, right? Because we'll talk about it in a little bit. But first, a big thank you from me to you. This tournament has been a journey, and whether it be from the first prediction video we made, the preview video, to the day recaps, the viewership has been off the chart. So a big thank you for watching, commenting. Every sort of like, comment, share really helps out the channel. So a really big thank you for that. And also the international audience, where you guys really picked it up after Canada got knocked out. I was sort of telling you earlier about how Canada is now the 5th most viewed for this tournament. So, a big thank you for watching, for commenting. I will get to the comments from yesterday's video. I am a little bit under the weather, so if you can hear me, sorry. So I had to sleep this morning. So anyway, long story short, I will respond to those tomorrow. I'll respond to today's comments. So a big thank you for commenting, for sharing, for liking, doing all of that, for subscribing as well. We've increased our subscriber base by, I think, 150 already. So a big thank you for that. And yeah, it's been a tournament where we have seen the improbables happen on just about every corner. We watched a Canadian team lose to Latvia together. We saw, a US team blow the living daylights out of a Canadian team. So anyway, long story short, a big thank you for watching, for liking, for subscribing, for commenting, all of that. And I hope to see you again in 2026 for the next World Juniors. We're also going to be doing, of course, the World Championships. Four Nations is a question mark. Women's World Championship as well. Most likely we're going to do again. So if you are interested, be sure to stick around, subscribe, as we will be doing all of that. So look forward to the next one because it's right around the corner and the national season is back. Let's look at the final playoff picture now with, of course, the U.S. winning it all over Finland. We look back to the quarterfinal matchups, right, where the U.S. beat Switzerland, Czechia upset Canada, Finland beat Slovakia, and Sweden beat Latvia. Finland knocked out Sweden to the bronze medal game. Czechs as well lost to the U.S. And then from there, the U.S. won gold today in dramatic fashion in overtime. Czechia won the bronze in a 14-round shootout. So really sort of sums up the tournament of what the heck happened. And when I'll flip it over to the final rankings, so we start here with, of course, the U.S. in first place, Finland in second, Czechs in third, Sweden in fourth, Canada in fifth, Slovakia in sixth, Latvia in seventh, Switzerland in eighth, Germany in ninth. Remember, they won the relegation game, which means Kazakhstan is your 10th team, will be demoted back down to Division 1A. And for the tournament awards, the directed awards, Petteri Rimponen, Axel Sandin Pelican, Ryan Leonard were your goalie, defense, and forward. The media awards for All-Star Team, Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, and Jakob Sensel. Cole Hudson for the defense, Axel Sandin Pellikka as well. Cole Hudson did lead the tournament in points as a defenseman, so a little surprising not to see him win the directorate awards, but I'll rest my case. And then the goaltender Rimponen in net. And then the Murray Costello Award for MVP named this year after a long-time Hockey Canada rep, big founder of women's hockey in Hockey Canada, around the world, IIHF Hall of Fame, Hockey Hall of Fame, Canadian Hockey Hall of Fame, lots of awards to his name. The award was named in his memory. So the Murray Costello Award this year for Most Valuable Player of the tournament, Ryan Leonard, not really a surprise there. So, another great tournament where we saw a lot of upsets, right? And I know last year, because I was rewatching the final video for a little bit of inspiration of what to do. And one of the things I did was look back and say, at each team at the tournament and said what they have to be proud of. And this tournament especially, first time since 1999 with the new format where every team has registered a point. And that alone is a big deal for this tournament because, it hasn't been a very competitive tournament in years past. Yet we see teams like Kazakhstan giving scares to Slovakia and Latvia beating Canada, for example, Finland upsetting the U.S. And, Germany, of course, losing to Latvia in overtime after trying to win in regulation. These are just some of the games we're seeing. And Czechia, of course, beating Canada for the second year in a row. So we'll go through each team. We'll start here with Kazakhstan. So I already talked about it. Kazakhstan at this tournament, not expected to do anything. Not even expected to get a point. The betting lines, which I always love to look at the start of these tournaments, was 2.5 goals for Kazakhstan to score throughout the entire tournament. And that means that you're betting either over, which means they score 3 goals or more, or under, which means 0 goals, 1 goal, or 2 goals. And the fact that they were that low kind of surprised me coming in. And, I had them at a lot more goals because we've sort of seen what they're able to do when they actually get space on the ice. And sure enough, Kazakhstan scores 2 shorthanded goals on a 5-minute major against one of the best defensive teams in the tournament, forcing overtime and nearly winning in overtime. Big thing for Kazakhstan to be proud of. Yes, they're going back to relegation, but, the hope in that building for Kazakhstan to win it all. Is there anything better than that, right? Like the fact that Kazakhstan could have won this game had the opportunities been right, and they had the chance. And it's one of those crazy things where we could have saw, Kazakhstan not be the team in the relegation game, where if they found a way to win that game, regulation would be what Switzerland had to win. And we very well could have seen another Germany-Latvia example. And I will talk about Germany where, they won the game that matters, right? A very tough group this year. You had Latvia, who kind of came out of nowhere, and you outplayed Latvia, you outplayed Canada. The U.S., you had them 3-2 through halfway through the second, so that's impressive. 3-1 game against Finland, which was a really impressive performance because you nearly won that game too. So for Germany, they won the game that matters. They stay up another year. Was it tight? Yes. But at the same time, Germany wins the games they need to. They did it again this year, so something to be proud of there. For Switzerland, they were a team at this tournament where they were a wild card for me, right? I didn't know what to expect from them. You had a lot of wild cards on the team. You had a lot of wild cards kind of in the group. So for me, I wasn't expecting too much. They ended up winning the game that mattered. Couple giveaways here and there. But, they held in with just about every team. I think it was a 7-5 performance against Sweden. A tougher game against the Czechs. But still, they were in it, right? And a couple of bounces here and there might have led to a different result where, Switzerland had a lot of opportunities. They just didn't have the skill to bury it. And, if they can play like that next year, look out, because they really only have to win one game to make it an interesting tournament, right? They have to beat Germany. So it's going to be interesting to see sort of their transition into the new year, the players they bring in. And I'm very curious with this team to see what's going on because they're a dangerous team at this tournament, which brings me to the next one with Latvia. And yeah, I don't know what to think about Latvia. They were, in my eyes, the biggest surprise of this tournament, but the best surprise, right? Where, yes, they beat Canada. Yes, they probably knocked them out in the long run. But Feldberg's in net. Matejko on the forward. Two guys very well could have made that media all-star team. And in my eyes, my best surprise, nearly beating Sweden. They held the U.S. to a 5-1 game. The Latvia-Finland game wasn't great for them. Two teams knowing each other's styles typically doesn't work for the more defensive team, but still a close game there. And then, of course, the Germany game where those 2 points against Canada came in clutch, right? Where Germany had to win regulation and Latvia won the game that matters. And that's kind of the key to this for a lot of these teams is winning the game that matters. And for Latvia, they won 2 games that matter to them. And first time ever beating Canada. Very impressive tournament for the Latvian team. And a lot of guys that I hope to see at next year's tournament, right? Because that's the beautiful thing about some of these quote-unquote lesser countries, right? The European countries, where they're not necessarily at the top of the rankings, right, on paper, but they have potential to grow into that role. And, teams like Latvia was one of those big surprises from this tournament. And the question was asked to me in a comment, it was a couple days ago, and it was about, in a couple of years, how many guys from this team do you think will be NHL prospects? And it was a really good question because you look at that team up and down the roster, their commitment to their structure was the one thing that really dominated everything from this tournament. And they played a lot of defense. They scored goals when the opportunity presented itself. And overall, they were lights out. And I'll be curious to see how many players get scouted because of this tournament for them, where, kind of a throwaway game against Canada all of a sudden becomes a 3-2 victory. And then you have everyone at the tournament looking at you because you just upset one of, if not the favorite, to win it all this year. So for Latvia, lots to be proud of here and a really solid performance top down for them at this tournament. Then we go to Slovakia and another team where they were trying to choose the words carefully because they were really good, right? They had really good moments and they had really bad moments. And their game against the Czechs, pretty back and forth game. Their game against Switzerland, well played to the very end. Switzerland has a giveaway that makes them end up winning that game. Kazakhstan, they kind of blew that one. But, Slovakia then plays Finland. And, they were right in that game to the very end, right? So, 1-goal game at one point. Finland pots the extra. So for Slovakia in this tournament, another thing to be proud of, right? Because they played a very good tournament. The games that mattered, they were very good in, and they won a lot of the games that mattered. They won 2 games, especially, Switzerland and Kazakhstan, although the Kazakhstan one was a little scary. But 2 big wins, nearly pulled off the upset against Finland, lots to be proud of in this one. Then we move to Canada, and as far as teams go, I mean, I have to say, it's probably the worst we've seen from this Canadian group. Pre-tournament, something to be proud of. They played pretty well against Sweden, Czech, Switzerland. First game of the tournament against Finland, really well played. And then kind of came a little bit of a struggle where they had a tough game against Latvia, lost in a shootout. Schaefer went down. You could kind of see it that the defense was struggling a little bit. Then you play Germany, and a lot of the same mistakes were being made. You get a lucky bounce, puts the 2-0 goal. You get the empty net for the third. Probably should have been a lot, tighter of a game. Germany had lots of good looks, nearly scored twice. So, a game that could probably have gone back and forth. And then, of course, you look at the next 2 games with the U.S., not a great game, lots of penalties. And then the Czechs with a lot of penalties. So, if we're looking for one good thing out of this tournament for Canada, it's that, they beat the Finns in convincing fashion. And I think that's basically the only positive you draw from their tournament. Their crowd was pretty good. As someone that was in the building, you can go back in the videos in the first 30 seconds of any Canada game, we show the crowd. And they were electric, is what I will say. The Latvia loss took a lot out of the crowd. The German game was a rough one to watch for Canada, and the U.S. one was just a disappointment. So for Canada, their highlight of the tournament, in my eyes, was beating Finland on the opening night. Not too much else positive from Canada's tournament here. I could lie, I could try and make something up, but that's their positive. Moving on to Sweden, and this was a tournament for Sweden that it feels like deja vu again too, right? Where Sweden comes in as a hot red favorites, and then they win out the group, and then they get to the playoffs, and right, like it's disappointment, is what I'd say for Sweden. And their positive of the tournament obviously is sweeping the group. Did they play great in those games? They played a good game against the Czechs. A couple of the other games, they were okay. They nearly blew a lead against Switzerland. Their Slovakia game was, but for Sweden, winning the games at the end of the day, doesn't matter how you win, but how many. And Sweden definitely won their group in convincing enough fashion that it was okay. So for Sweden, and then you play Latvia, tough game against Latvia. And then comes the quarters, right? The semis, rather. And it's just that Sweden curse is back. And so anyway, long story short, for Sweden, the positive of the tournament, despite coming fourth, in my eyes, still is, you swept the group stage yet again. And you beat the team that ended up beating you for the bronze. And I think, in convincing fashion too, that's something to keep your head up about, because this Czech team was no joke this year. And, we saw Sweden kind of outplay the Czechs in that preliminary game. But tonight, a different Czech team came to play and a different Swedish team came to play. So, in the long run, their highlight of the tournament for Sweden was winning the group stage. For Czechia, they were a team at this tournament where my expectations for them weren't great. I had them losing to Finland in my predictions, but they were a good team, and they were a team, right? And that's the one thing that we kind of saw, especially when they played some of the better teams in this tournament, right? Like the U.S., where Czechs played as a team, the U.S. played as individuals. Yes, the U.S. ended up winning, but the Czech game was really impressive throughout this entire tournament. So the Czechs, their highlight obviously is winning the bronze medal. But in my eyes, their highlight of the tournament was impressing a lot of people. And, you beat Canada again. You go on to lose, unfortunately, against the U.S. And then you beat Demons and you beat Sweden, right, in the bronze medal game, winning you the medal for the third year in a row where, they won bronze last year. They won silver the year before that against Canada. So it's an impressive result, right, for the Czechs. And it's really impressive to see how they've come on as a hockey country, too. So for Czechs, winning the bronze medal for me is their highlight of this tournament. Then on to Finland. And Finland's another team where it was difficult to see where they kind of faced up, right? They were poised for a tough matchup against Czechia. And so that led me to, I still took Finland over Czechs in the predictions. And then I think them losing to Sweden and I believe it was the U.S. In the bronze. So for Finland in this tournament, right, it's been a really impressive tournament to see kind of how they've come back. Because, you think back to the start of this one where they played, in my eyes, one of the worst games I've seen from Finland against Canada, where they kind of just looked flat as all can be. A tough game against Germany. They go on to beat the U.S. They beat Latvia in a very convincing fashion. Yes, the score doesn't dictate it, but they played a good game. A little bit of a scare in that Slovak game, but they still played well enough to get there. And then, of course, beating Sweden, their rivals, in the semis, and then playing in that gold medal game where you're one goal away from winning gold again. So for Finland, another impressive tournament for them. I know their fans are very happy with their performance back home, not expected to do that much in this tournament, but they surprised a lot of people, including myself, how far they've gone and how well they've looked, especially towards the end of the tournament. So for me, that's the thing to look up to for Finland, a good thing from them. And then, of course, we said the exact same thing last year. The U.S., the highlight obviously is winning gold, but also how they went about winning it. They started rough against Germany and, 3-2 halfway through the second was kind of something that scared me about this U.S. team, right? Because if they struggled against Germany, they're going to struggle against Finland, they're going to struggle against Latvia, and then their quarterfinal matchup, they're probably going to struggle. But then they turned it up a notch, and all of a sudden we're playing like the U.S. of old. So they're a dangerous team. They always were. They had 10 returning guys coming into this tournament from last year's gold medal winning team. So another very impressive tournament for the U.S. where they win gold yet again. So that's my one big thing from each team in this tournament. A very impressive tournament. First time since 1999 where every team's recorded a point in the preliminary round. The other thing on that is it's the first time since the new format where every team's recorded a preliminary point. Remember that it used to be no playoffs, 7-team round robin, and so, big deal there, or 7-game round robin rather. And now let's take a look at 2026 and dangerous. And for Canada, I don't know how many Canadians are tuning into this video, so I'm going to keep my Canada segment short here. I'm scared. I'm really scared because you're facing two-time champion Sweden, who always sweeps the preliminary, Switzerland, who, you lost to Latvia this year, no team safe, and then Germany, who once again nearly beat you in the preliminary this year. So Group A, very scary. Group B, Finland, Czechia, Slovaks, Latvia, and Denmark. Denmark is the promoted team from Division 1A, so, big deal for them. But, they have the potential, and Denmark is not a team you can count out here because teams like Latvia have beaten Canada in this tournament. So, if it's an early look, as the Canadian fan that's lost a whole bunch of games this tournament, I'm going to take Sweden 1, US 2, Canada 3, and then maybe Switzerland 4. Yeah, we'll go Switzerland 4 for that. Finland, Czechia, Slovakia, Latvia, Denmark, expect the Finns to top the group. But Czechia very well could be there as well. It's just a matter of which players are able to come back for the Czechs, which is coming in their new team, and what guys return from Finland, right? How many players are back for them? What's the talent that they're bringing in? But Finland's always a tough team to play, especially in the round robin. So, when we look at this, if Canada places third and Czechia once again places second, we're back. We're back for round 3, and it scares me as a Canadian fan. So 2026 is going to be a good one. Stay tuned. We'll have full coverage of that, obviously. And one last big thank you for all the support through these videos. It's truly meant the world, and I hope to see you back for 2026. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you really like, consider subscribing. Tell all your friends. Leave a comment down below your thoughts on the World Junior Championship 2025. Until next time, see you.